Royal Guard William Davies had been standing at his post outside Windsor Castle for 3 hours when he noticed the man approaching. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon in September, with tourists moving in small groups around the castle grounds. Taking photographs and admiring the historic architecture, William had learned to identify different types of visitors during his 2 years of service. But something about this particular man immediately caught his attention. The man appeared to be in his 40s, wearing a worn baseball cap pulled low over his face and a heavy jacket despite the warm weather. His movements were erratic and purposeful at the same time, as if he was building up courage for something. William had been trained to notice these subtle signs of unusual behavior. Every instinct told him to remain alert. What made the situation even more concerning was that the man kept reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out what appeared to be a small spray bottle. He would look at it, then at William, then put it back in his pocket. This pattern repeated several times as he slowly moved closer to the guard posts. William maintained his disciplined stance, eyes forward, but his peripheral vision tracked every movement. The man was now close enough that William could see his face more clearly. There was something desperate in his expression, mixture of determination and anguish that suggested he was struggling with some internal battle. Other tourists in the area seemed oblivious to the tension building in the situation. Children were laughing and pointing at William's impressive uniform. Parents were taking photos, and elderly visitors were reading guidebooks about the castle's history. The normal flow of daily life continued around them, but William could feel that something significant was about to happen. The man stopped about 10 feet away from William's position and stood there for several minutes, his hand gripping something in his pocket. William could see sweat beading on the man's forehead despite the comfortable temperature, and his breathing appeared labored and irregular. "Excuse me," the man finally called out, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "Excuse me, guard." Was not supposed to respond to casual interactions with tourists. But something in the man's tone suggested this was not a typical request for directions or information. There was an urgency and emotion in his voice that cut through the usual tourist chatter. The man took several steps closer, pulling the spray bottle fully out of his pocket now. William could see it was a small plastic bottle, the kind used for travel-sized toiletries. The liquid inside appeared to be clear, but William had no way of knowing what it contained or what the man intended to do with it. "I need to tell you something," the man continued, his voice growing stronger but also more emotional. "I need you to understand why I'm here." William remained in his formal position, but his mind was racing through his training protocols. He was prepared for various types of security threats, but this situation felt different from the scenarios he had practiced. The man didn't seem aggressive or threatening in a traditional sense, but there was clearly something troubling him. Deeply, the surrounding tourists began to notice the interaction developing between the man and the guard. Some stopped their conversations to observe, sensing that something unusual was happening. A few parents quietly moved their children to a safer distance, while others pulled out their phones, either to record what might unfold or to be ready to call for help if needed. "My son wanted to be like you," the man said suddenly, his voice breaking slightly. "He wanted to serve in the Royal Guard more than anything else in the world. It was his dream since he was a little boy." William felt his heart rate increase, not from fear of the spray bottle, but from the raw emotion in the man's voice. Whatever was about to happen, it was connected to something deeply personal and painful for this stranger. The man raised the spray bottle, pointing it in William's direction. Several tourists gasped and began backing away, but the man's attention was completely focused on the guard in front of him. "His name was Michael," the man continued, tears now visible on his cheeks. "Michael Harrison. He would have been 22 years old today." William understood immediately that he was dealing with a grieving father, and the spray bottle in the man's hand represented something far more complex than a simple threat or prank. The would-have-been phrasing told him everything he needed to know about why this man was here and why this date was significant. The man's hand was shaking now as he held the spray bottle. William could see the internal struggle playing out in his expression. Whatever he was planning to do, it was clearly difficult for him, and it was connected to the loss of his son, Michael. "I'm sorry," the man whispered, just loud enough for William to hear. "I'm so sorry, but I have to do this. It's the only way. I know how to honor him." William braced himself, not knowing what to expect but understanding that whatever was about to happen would require him to respond with both professionalism and compassion for a father's grief. The man raised the spray bottle with both hands, his entire body trembling as he aimed it toward William. The gathered tourists held their breath, some covering their children's eyes, others reaching for their phones to call security. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "Michael died 3 months ago," the man said, his voice growing stronger through his tears. "He was killed in a training accident at Sandhurst, 3 weeks before graduation, 3 weeks before his dream of joining the Royal Guard would have come true." William felt his heart break for this grieving father. The spray bottle was still pointed at him, but now he understood that whatever was inside it was connected to the man's son and his unfulfilled dream of military service. "He used to practice standing at attention in our backyard for hours," the man continued, his voice becoming more steady as he shared his memories. "He would wear his school uniform and pretend to be a royal guard. He said he wanted to serve the Queen with honor and dignity, just like his grandfather did during World War II. The surrounding crowd had grown larger, with more tourists and even some castle staff members gathering to witness the unfolding drama. Security personnel were quietly positioning themselves nearby, but they seemed to understand that this was not a typical threat situation. Every morning before school, Michael would polish his shoes until they gleamed, the man said, a small smile breaking through his tears. He said that when he became a royal guard, he wanted his uniform to be perfect every single day. He wanted to make his country proud. William remained perfectly still, but inside he was deeply moved by the father's words. He could picture the young man practicing his military bearing, dreaming of the day he would stand where William stood now, serving with honor and pride. "The night before the accident, Michael called me," the man continued, his grip on the spray bottle tightening. He was so excited. Said he had been selected for special recognition at graduation. He was going to be one of the honor graduates, and he wanted me to be there to see him receive his commission. The man paused, overcome with emotion, and William could see the tremendous effort it was taking for him to continue his story. The spray bottle remained pointed toward him, but William no longer felt threatened. Instead, he felt honored to be hearing about Michael's dedication and dreams. "I bought a new suit for his graduation ceremony," the man said quietly. "I practiced what I would say when people asked me about my son, the Royal Guard. I was so proud of him, so proud of the man he had become." A few people in the crowd were now crying openly, touched by the raw grief and love in the father's voice. William noticed that even the security personnel seemed moved by what they were hearing. But then the phone call came, the man said, his voice breaking again. "2 officers came to my door to tell me that Michael had been killed in a training exercise. A routine training exercise that went wrong. He died doing what he loved," they said. "He died pursuing his dream." William felt tears forming in his own eyes, though he maintained his disciplined posture. The story of Michael's dedication and tragic death resonated deeply with him, reminding him of why he had chosen to serve and how precious that opportunity was. "I couldn't go to the graduation ceremony," the man said. "I couldn't bear to see all those young officers receiving their commissions when Michael never got his chance. So instead, I came here, to where he always dreamed of serving." The man's hands were shaking more violently now. William could see that he was approaching the moment when whatever he had planned would happen. The spray bottle remained pointed toward him, and the crowd watched in suspense. "Michael made me promise something before his last deployment to training," the man said, his voice becoming whisper quiet. "He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would find a way to let a real royal guard know how much serving meant to him." William understood now that whatever was in the spray bottle, it was the man's way of fulfilling that promise to his deceased son. The father was about to spray him with something, but it wasn't an attack or a prank. It was a memorial, tribute, a way of connecting his son's memory to the service he had dreamed of providing. "This belonged to Michael," the man said, holding up the spray bottle so everyone could see it clearly. "It's his cologne. It's the same cologne he wore every day, the same one he was going to wear on his graduation day." He said a royal guard should always smell as sharp as he looks. The crowd collectively exhaled, understanding finally that this was not a weapon or a threat, but something deeply personal and meaningful. William felt a profound sense of respect for both the grieving father and his son's memory. Up his own money to buy this cologne, the man continued, his voice steadying as he shared more about his son. It was expensive for a young man on a student budget, but he said it was an investment in his future. He wanted everything about his appearance to be perfect when he became a guard. William could see the love and pride in the father's eyes as he spoke about Michael's attention to detail and dedication to his dream. The spray bottle, which had initially appeared threatening, is actually a treasured memento of a young man's aspirations. He used to practice his military bearing in front of the mirror while wearing this cologne, the man said with a tearful smile. He would stand at attention and imagine himself protecting the royal family, serving with honor and dignity. This scent was part of that dream. Several people in the crowd were openly weeping now, moved by the father's devotion to his son's memory and the tragic story of dreams cut short. Even the security personnel had relaxed, recognizing that this was a memorial moment rather than a security threat. I know this might seem strange, the man said, addressing William directly now, but I need to spray some of Michael's cologne on you. I need to know that part of him, even just his scent, will be with a real royal guard for a little while. It's the only way I can think of to fulfill the promise I made to him. William felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This father was asking him to participate in a deeply personal ritual of remembrance, and William understood that his response would mean everything to this grieving man. The man raised the spray bottle again, but this time his movements were reverent rather than desperate. Michael would have been honored to serve alongside someone like you, he said quietly. He studied everything about the Royal Guard, the history, the traditions, the requirements. He knew more about this service than some people who actually wear the uniform. William remained perfectly still, but internally he was making a decision that went far beyond his standard training protocols. This situation called for compassion and humanity, not just military discipline. He had already been fitted for his dress uniform, the man continued, tears flowing freely now. The tailor said he had never seen a young officer more excited about receiving his first formal uniform. Michael talked about it for weeks, planning how he would wear it, how he would carry himself, how he would make his family proud. The spray bottle was now just a few feet from William, and the man was looking at him with desperate hope in his eyes. "Please," he whispered, "I know you're not supposed to break protocol, but please let me do this for Michael. Let me keep my promise. To my son." William could feel the eyes of everyone around him. Tourists, security personnel, castle staff, all waiting to see how he would respond to this extraordinary request. His training told him to maintain his position and wait for security to handle the situation. But his heart told him something entirely different. The man's grief was raw and authentic. His love for his son, undeniable. And his request came from a place of pure devotion rather than any desire to cause harm or disruption. William realized that sometimes the most important moments in life require us to choose compassion over protocol. Michael always said that the best royal guards were the ones who understood that their service was about more than just following rules, the man said softly. He said it was about representing the highest ideals of honor, duty, and compassion. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. William Davies, the disciplined royal guard who had never broken protocol in 2 years of service, made a decision that came purely from his heart. Slowly and deliberately, William stepped forward from his post. The crowd gasped softly as they watched the guard break his rigid stance and approach the grieving father. This was completely unprecedented. Royal guards were known for their unwavering discipline and adherence to protocol, regardless of circumstances. Sir William said quietly, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. "It would be my honor to help you keep your promise to Michael." The father's face crumpled with relief and gratitude. His hands, which had been shaking with nervousness and grief, steadied as he realized that this royal guard understood the significance of what he was asking. William positioned himself directly. In front of the man, standing at perfect attention. Michael sounds like he would have made an exceptional royal guard, William said formally. Any young man with that level of dedication and respect for service deserves to have his dreams honored. The surrounding crowd watched in absolute silence as the father raised the spray bottle with trembling but reverent hands. This is for you, Michael, he whispered, looking upward as if his son could see this moment from heaven. This is your cologne, worn by a real royal guard, just like you always dreamed. The father gently squeezed the spray bottle, releasing a fine mist of cologne that settled on William's uniform. The scent was subtle and dignified, exactly what a young man aspiring to military service might choose.
Ow.
As the cologne settled on his uniform, William stood perfectly still, understanding that he was participating in something sacred. Thank you, the father said, his voice breaking with emotion. Thank you for letting part of Michael serve, even if it's just for today. William maintained his military bearing, but his voice was gentle when he replied, Sir Michael is serving right now. His dedication to this service, his love for his country, and his commitment to honor are all present in this moment. That kind of devotion never dies. The crowd around them had grown significantly, with many people taking photos and videos of this extraordinary interaction. But the attention wasn't intrusive or exploitative. Instead, it felt like a community witnessing something beautiful and meaningful. An elderly gentleman in the crowd stepped forward, moving his hat respectfully. Young man, he said, addressing the father. I've served in Her Majesty's forces for 30 years, and I can tell you that your son's spirit is exactly what makes our military strong. He would be proud of what you've done here today.
Oh.
Other veterans in the crowd began to identify themselves, forming a small circle of support around the grieving father. William watched with deep respect as these men and women, who understood the weight of military service and sacrifice, offered their condolences and shared their own stories of comrades lost too soon. A woman approached with her young son, who appeared to be about 8 years old. My boy wants to be a soldier when he grows up, she said softly to the father. Would it be all right if he heard about Michael? I think it would help him understand what service really means. The father's face lit up with the first genuine smile William had seen from him. Michael would have loved to inspire a young boy, he said, kneeling down to the child's level. Let me tell you about my son, and why he wanted to protect people like you. As the father began sharing stories about Michael with the young boy, William realized that something remarkable was happening. What had started as one man's desperate attempt to honor his son's memory was becoming a community celebration of service, sacrifice, and the dreams that inspire young people to serve their country. The scent of Michael's cologne remained on William's uniform, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life happen when we choose to break the rules in service of something greater than protocol. As word of the extraordinary encounter spread throughout the castle grounds, more people began gathering around William and the father. Castle staff members, who had initially been concerned about a potential security incident, now understood. They were witnessing something far more meaningful than a disruption of normal protocol. Senior Guard Captain Richard Morrison, who had served for over 20 years, approached the scene after being alerted by security. William expected to be reprimanded for breaking protocol, but Captain Morrison's expression showed understanding rather than disapproval. Guard Davies, Captain Morrison said formally, but his tone was respectful rather than disciplinary. I've been briefed on the situation. Please continue with your current assignment. William understood that his commanding officer was giving him permission to remain with the father and honor Michael's memory. Despite the deviation from standard procedures, this level of flexibility was unprecedented. But Captain Morrison clearly recognized the exceptional nature of the circumstances. The father, who had introduced himself as Robert Harrison, was now surrounded by a growing group of people who wanted to hear about Michael's dream and dedication. Veterans, military families, and ordinary citizens were all drawn to the story of a young man whose commitment to service had been cut short just weeks before achieving his goal. Michael used to write me letters every week from Sandhurst, Robert told the gathered crowd, his voice growing stronger as he shared his son's story. He would describe his training exercises, his fellow cadets, and his instructors. But what he wrote about most was his excitement about eventually serving at places like this, protecting the traditions and values he believed in. William listened intently as Robert shared more details about Michael's character and dreams. The young man had clearly been exceptional, not just in his academic and physical performance, but in his understanding of what military service truly meant. A young woman in the crowd stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "My brother is currently at Sandhurst," she said quietly. "He talks about his training the same way your son did. Reading his letters reminds me so much of what you're describing about Michael." Robert's face brightened at this connection. "What's your brother's name?" he asked gently. Maybe he knew Michael, or at least knew of him. Michael was always eager to help his fellow cadets succeed. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Collins. And as she and Robert began comparing stories about their family members' experiences at the military academy, William realized that Michael's story was creating connections between people who might never have spoken otherwise. An older man who identified himself as a retired Royal Guard approached William directly. "Young man," he said quietly, "what you did today embodies everything this service is supposed to represent. Sometimes the most important duty we can perform is showing compassion to those who need it most." William felt humbled by the veteran's words, but also validated in his decision to break protocol. He had acted on instinct and compassion, and it seemed that his choice was resonating with people who understood the deeper meaning of service. As the afternoon progressed, Robert began sharing specific stories about Michael's preparation for Royal Guard service. He had memorized every detail about the different ceremonial uniforms, Robert said with obvious pride. He knew the history of each regiment, the significance of every piece of equipment, and the proper protocol for dozens of different ceremonies. Captain Morrison, who had remained nearby to observe the situation, stepped forward at this point. "Mr. Harrison, your son's level of preparation and dedication would have made him an exceptional Royal Guard. The commitment you've described is exactly what we look for in candidates for this service." Robert looked at the captain with gratitude and surprise. "Thank you, sir. Michael would have been so honored to hear that from someone in your position." Captain Morrison nodded respectfully. "Mr. Harrison, I'd like to invite you to attend our next ceremonial guard change. I think Michael would have wanted you to see the ceremony he was training to participate in." The offer clearly moved Robert deeply. I would be honored, sir. Michael always said he wanted me to see him perform in an official ceremony. This would be the closest I could ever come to fulfilling that wish." William watched this exchange with profound respect for his commanding officer's compassion and understanding. The decision to invite Robert to attend the ceremony showed that the Royal Guard's commitment to honor extended beyond their official duties to embrace the families of those who had aspired to serve. 2 weeks later, Robert Harrison returned to Windsor Castle, this time as an honored guest rather than a desperate father seeking to fulfill a promise. The story of his encounter with William had spread far beyond the castle grounds, touching hearts across Britain and around the world. The video footage captured by tourists had been shared millions of times on social media, people praising both Robert's devotion to his son's memory and William's compassionate response. The story had become a symbol of how human connection and understanding could transcend rigid protocols when guided by genuine compassion. Robert arrived wearing his best suit, the same one he had purchased for Michael's graduation ceremony. Captain Morrison personally escorted him to a special viewing area, where he would have the perfect vantage point to watch the ceremonial guard change that Michael had dreamed of participating in.
Mr. Harrison?
Captain Morrison said as they waited. "For the ceremony to begin, I want you to know that Michael's story has had a profound impact on our entire regiment. We've established a memorial scholarship in his name for military academy cadets who demonstrate exceptional dedication to service." Robert's eyes filled with tears of gratitude and pride. Michael would be so honored to know that his dream is helping other young people achieve theirs. "Thank you for making something beautiful come from our tragedy." As the ceremony began, William took his position as part of the guard formation. The scent of Michael's cologne had long since faded from his uniform, but the memory of that extraordinary day remained vivid in his mind. He had learned that sometimes the most meaningful moments of service happen not during formal ceremonies, but in spontaneous acts of human compassion. The crowd gathered for the ceremony was larger than usual, as many people had come specifically to witness the event after hearing about Robert and Michael's story. Among them were several military families, veterans, and young people considering careers in service. It's all drawn by the powerful example of a son's dedication and a father's love. As William performed the precise movements he had practiced thousands of times, he thought about Michael Harrison, the young man who had practiced these same movements in his backyard, dreaming of the day he would serve with honor and distinction. In a way, Michael was present in the ceremony through the inspiration his story had provided to everyone involved. During the ceremony, Captain Morrison made an unprecedented announcement. Today's ceremony is dedicated to the memory of Officer Cadet Michael Harrison, who died in service to his country just weeks before achieving his dream of joining the Royal Guard. His dedication and sacrifice remind us all of why we serve. The crowd observed a moment of silence in Michael's honor, and Robert placed his hand over his heart, overwhelmed by the recognition his son was receiving. Several people in the crowd were crying openly, moved by the tribute to a young man they had never met, but whose story had touched their lives. After the ceremony concluded, William approached Robert with something he had prepared specially for. This day, it was a formal photograph of the Royal Guard Regiment, signed by every member, with a dedication to Michael's memory and service. Sir William said formally, presenting the photograph, "This is from all of us who wanted Michael's family to have something that represents the service he would have been part of." Robert accepted the photograph with shaking hands, reading the inscription aloud, "In honor of Officer Cadet Michael Harrison, whose dedication to service and love of country embodied the highest ideals of the Royal Guard, though he never wore our uniform, he will always be one of us." The presentation drew applause from the gathered crowd, and Robert found himself surrounded by well-wishers, veterans, and young people inspired by Michael's story. What had begun as one man's desperate attempt to honor his son's memory had become a community celebration of service, sacrifice, and the dreams that inspire people to serve something greater than themselves. Months later, William continued his service as a Royal Guard, but he carried with him a deeper understanding of what that service meant. The encounter with Robert Harrison had taught him that the most important duties weren't always found in protocol manuals or training exercises, but in moments when human compassion demanded a response that came from the heart. Robert established a foundation in Michael's name that provided support for military families dealing with loss, and he became a regular visitor to the castle. Not as a desperate father, but as someone whose story had reminded an entire nation about the real meaning of service and sacrifice. The spray bottle incident, as it came to be known, became legendary within the Royal Guard Regiment, not as a security breach or protocol violation, but as a perfect example of how true service sometimes requires us to choose compassion over procedure, understanding over inflexibility, and humanity over rules. William's unexpected reaction had created something beautiful from tragedy, and Michael Harrison's dream lived on in the inspiration his story provided to countless others who chose to serve.